Hi, I'm Lauren Card, VP of Operations and Regulatory Affairs for Paul Dick & Associates. PDA is a global consulting firm serving the animal health industry. Animal health encompasses a wide range of products that ultimately improve the health of animals. This includes pharmaceuticals, vaccines, diagnostics, feed ingredients, natural health products, and devices. Over the years, we've worked with hundreds of startups and large corporations from across the globe, helping them navigate the regulatory landscape in their target markets. Before a product for animals can be brought to market, whether this be a product for companion animals like dogs or cats, or food animals like poultry or swine, there is a rigorous regulatory review and approval process. Companies must sufficiently demonstrate that their products are safe for the target species, do not pose an unacceptable risk to the environment or non-target species, are beneficial to the target species when used as intended, and are manufactured in a controlled environment that consistently produces a high-quality product. In Canada, regulatory agencies like Health Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency are responsible for approving animal health products and will only do so after the complete data package for a product has been reviewed and found to be acceptable. The regulatory system in Canada is robust and ensures that products administered to animals are safe, efficacious, and of high quality. I think we can all agree that the system is absolutely necessary to ensure the public can trust the products they are giving to their pets and feel assured that any animal products being consumed are free from drug residues and safe for consumption. At PDA, we work closely with companies and regulatory agencies to ensure compliance and to assist with bringing innovative products to market that can improve the health of animals. But what, if any, are the downsides or unintended consequences of having regulatory requirements that may dissuade companies from bringing products to the Canadian market? Does this put Canadian farmers at a disadvantage? Does it mean Canadian pet owners can't get access to important drugs or health products that may be available to pet owners just south of the border? Could stringent regulatory requirements actually be putting animals at risk when the system is designed to do just the opposite? It's important to keep in mind that Canada is a small market. It represents between 2 and 3% of the global animal health market. The small market size, combined with stringent regulatory requirements, is an important consideration for companies when deciding which markets to pursue with their products. They are for-profit companies, and the return on investment is a key driver in deciding whether it makes good business sense to pursue the Canadian market at all. To explore this further, today I am speaking with Dr. Stephen Theriault, the Chief Executive Officer of Cytophage Technologies, a Canadian company that ultimately decided not to bring their products to Canada because of the regulatory burden. Cytophage is developing bacteriophages for livestock. Their products have the potential to reduce or even eliminate antibiotic use on farms. Currently, global antimicrobial usage on farms is estimated at close to 100,000 tons annually, and this is projected to increase steadily due to increased animal production driven by a rising global human population. While antimicrobials have historically played an important role in animal agriculture by helping to prevent and treat disease, while also improving growth and performance, the over and inappropriate use of antimicrobials can lead to resistance. The World Health Organization has identified antibiotic resistance as one of the biggest threats to global health and food security because it threatens our ability to treat bacterial disease. Fortunately, there is so much innovation in the animal health industry with the development of non-antibiotic products that can really help to address this problem. The question we are going to try to address today is, how do we get these products into the hands of Canadian producers? Stephen, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Again, thank you for the invitation.
Stephen, could you introduce yourself? Walk us through your academic and professional background.
Holy geez. It's funny. I've actually thought about this a little bit in the past. You tend to do that as you get older in your career. So I started off as a paramedic, actually. I came out of high school fell in love with helping people, and I wanted to do something with medicine. So I went ahead and did an education and got a degree, or a diploma, I guess, as an emergency medical care assistant. That turned me into looking at patient care, which then made me want to become a doctor. And it just sort of kind of filled in from there. So I went back to university as I was working as an air ambulance attendant, thinking that I could do both. Realized very quickly that I could not. So then I did my honors degree here in Manitoba, as well as my master's degree, as well as my PhD, all within the University of Manitoba. Now, my PhD was a little bit different because I actually worked outside of the university, and I worked at the Public Health Agency of Canada. And there, I was part of the team that created the Ebola vaccine. And I really learned how to become what I call a synthetic biologist, or an infectious disease specialist, while I was working at the Public Health Agency. Now, as I was working at the Public Health Agency, again, I'm somebody that has a very creative mind, one that likes to think outside of the box and come up with new strategies to deal with problems that we have around the world. And when I was working in the government, I was all young, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, had a great new job, and I was out to change the world. And we started creating products, and these products would all relate around antimicrobial, or getting rid of antibiotics. As I worked in the government for a while, I realized that somebody with a creative mind didn't really fit into a government structure. There's lots of stories I can tell you about, patents that I've put in, and I got $1 from the government for my patent rights. Things like that just sort of kind of leave a bad taste in your mouth as a scientist, because you're doing great work, but the only recognition that you're really getting is, let's just say government recognition, which isn't, something that is always what we need. So in saying all of that, I decided that, it was about 15 or 20 years ago. I had an idea, and the idea was to create bacteriophages synthetically, because there are a lot of inherent problems with bacteriophages, and there's reasons why they're not commercializable. But these all could be overcome by using synthetic biology, or let's say molecular genetics, because synthetic biology generally makes people scared.
I'm just going to interrupt you there, Stephen. Just for our listeners, can you explain what bacteriophages are?
Oh, sure. So bacteriophages are viruses that only infect bacteria. They don't infect humans. They don't infect plants. They don't have any effect on animals. All they do are kill off bacteria. They've been, nature has developed them to specifically do this. And the interesting thing about bacteriophages is, if you were to look at your arm, you probably have 1 billion of them sitting right there. And it's all part of our normal flora, or our normal, bacterial colonies on our skin, within our guts, and everywhere. It actually, keeps us protected from pathogenic bacteria, and of course makes us healthy. So bacteriophages, even though we call them viruses, and when people think of viruses, they think of COVID and they think of bad, these are good viruses. These viruses don't have any deleterious effect on humans. So bacteriophages themselves, again, for myself, were a clear solution to AMR, and a clear solution to, resistance in hospitals. Because again, I was a human scientist when I started Cytophage, when I started the company, and I was looking at human therapies, but very quickly realized that moving into human studies in Canada is a lot more difficult than moving into animal studies in Canada, which is, again, still very difficult. But in saying that, I was sitting here and we were discussing, the path forward for the company as to whether or not we really wanted to focus in on human health, or if we wanted to jump into animal health. And animal health was the place that we saw the biggest need, because again, animals, currently 70% of our antibiotics are used in animal feed. We have to have some solution for farmers to actually deal with those types of problems. And what I did was I sat back and I came up with a plan to create a fully synthetic template. Now, what I mean by a template is, it's basically, think of a train, and each train car is a gene, and we can remove or insert those genes. Now, I'm being very simplistic here, but this is sort of how somebody can understand how we modify a bacteriophage to make sure that it does exactly what we want it to do. And again, genetically, we have the abilities, and bacteriophages are so uniquely small as well as genetically variable that we can actually have good development of bacteriophages. So to jump back to me, what I ended up doing was I rented space at the university. I worked weekends and nights developing this for probably 7 years. Once I had the technology and I felt comfortable with moving forward, I wrapped a company around the technology in 2016, and we moved forward in 2017 as a legitimate biotech company in Canada. And now it's 2023. So we've had 6 years of moving forward. And right now, I'm extremely happy to say that we're selling our product in South Asia, as well as other jurisdictions around the world, but unfortunately not in Canada. And I guess that's why we're here today.
You mentioned that your phages are genetically modified to do exactly what you want them to do. Can you expand on why this makes them better than natural phages?
Yeah, so I always talk about genetic modification because there's 3 or 4 distinct paths that we can do with bacteriophage. So natural phages we can use. If you find a natural phage that has all of the features of a good commercialized product, you can actually package that and commercialize it. So there are those phages out there. But what we're finding is majority of phages have unique resistant genes, so lysogenic genes. Now, these genes allow the bacteriophage to modify itself in nature when it needs to. So again, we all evolve, viruses evolve the same way that we do, and this is part of its evolutionary structure. So we as commercial people don't necessarily want this to happen because we want the phage to kill the bacteria for as long as it possibly can and not modify itself to reduce its effectiveness, because that's what generally phages do, right? If a virus kills off all of its host, there's no more host for the virus to survive. So that's part of the process. So we can genetically alter, and again, I'm going to say that we genetically alter using synthetic biology, but we also genetically alter using environmental modifications. So, just one point I always want to add is bacteriophages are not genetically modified organisms, and they're not going to make you grow a tail and ears if you consume food that's been treated by a bacteriophage. That's not even close to any reality that can happen. But for us, if we have people that are not, or companies or countries that are not interested in genetically modifying, we can use environmental modification for that. So again, it gives you sort of an open discussion about how we can make our phages better. So jumping back to making them better, again, if we have a phage that can cause resistance, then that resistance occurs very quickly and the phage will become ineffective in a commercial setting. So we can sort of get around that. The other thing that we do is we really pride ourselves on the growth of our bacteriophage. So when we're treating animals, we have to treat them with a certain concentration of viruses. If that concentration is too high, then the cost effectiveness disappears. Because again, antibiotics are very cheap to make. People have been making them for many, many years. So when we compete with antibiotics to a farmer, we have to be price competitive as well. So for us, we, again, modify our organisms to allow them to grow to extremely high titers. And those extremely high titers allow us to have a commercial product. So for instance, when we're treating chickens, I treat them every single day with phages for 32 days. And I can do that because we can grow the phages to such a high concentration, and it makes it very economical.
Got it. Okay. So my other question, you mentioned that you took an interest in phages because of the widespread antimicrobial resistance that we're starting to see with antibiotics. So my question is, if, let's say, we were to replace antibiotic use with phage use, is it possible that those pathogens could develop resistance to phages as well?
Yeah, so absolutely. The one thing I like telling people here is, what we're doing currently is we're changing our model from using chemicals, which are very distinct, meaning if you have a chemical, it's going to do a job and you know exactly how it's going to do it because it's a chemical. Phages are different. This is a biological organism. So for us, when we use phages, we are going to see resistance occurring. And that's why companies that do sell and have an active product in phages have to do monitoring. And that will allow us to actually ensure that the product will stay on top of those resistances. Now, the other thing I want to add there, though, is, again, we're a little bit different as a company. We add genetic information that allows the bacteriophage to determine if the bacteria is becoming resistant to the phage, not the other way around, but the other way. And we should be able to get over that. Now, what I mean by that is, if you have a resistance that's occurring, again, I don't want to get too sciencey here. So if I get too sciencey, just tell me to slow down. But if you have a gene, that gene, when it mutates so when it mutates, it's going to become more resistant as it mutates, let's say, as an example. So now that phage attaches to it, it kills it, no problem. But now that bacteria realizes that it's dying, so it's going to modify itself. And it modifies itself by changing a nucleotide on that binding domain. So what we do is we make sure our phages have all of those capture mutants on there. So that's a way that we stop resistance from occurring. I just sold some company secrets to you there. But,
no, that's really interesting. Yeah, I probably should have said at the beginning, let's keep it non-confidential.
No, for sure. But it gives you an example of how, as a company, we're looking at that modification, we're looking at the resistance, and we're taking it very seriously, because this could be something that could knock phage down a little bit, meaning, if it's using it and then a resistance occurs.
Right.
So what we do is we make sure that doesn't occur. And so far, we have not seen resistance occur in a laboratory setting or in the field for over 12 months.
Okay. That's really interesting. Yeah. So, Stephen, you talked about how phages are everywhere in our environment. They are on us, they are around us. Can you walk me through when you administer these phages to chickens, for example, and they ingest them? Can you walk me through what happens to that phage? Where does it go once it's ingested by the chicken?
Sure. So for us, we're using a water system for feeding the chickens. The reason we do that, of course, is because when an animal is sick, they usually drink water, but they won't eat food. Just like us, we want chicken soup. We don't want to eat a steak. So for us, when we put the phage into the water, the chicken then goes and drinks the water. When it drinks the water, it gets phage into its basically its beak going into its stomach. As soon as that phage gets into the chicken, it attaches to a bacterial cells that are pathogenic that we're targeting. So for us, we target Salmonella, E. coli, and Clostridium in our products. So Salmonella and E. coli are the two organisms that cause the most problems in poultry farms. Again, Salmonella is not a chicken infection, it's a human infection, but chickens will harbor Salmonella there. So again, as we clean out, so as we add the bacteriophage will attach to the bacteria. It'll inject its genetic information into that bacteria. Then it will replicate itself, producing more of itself. And then once it's produced more of itself to what we call a burst capacity, it'll actually cause that bacteria cell to burst open, releasing more viruses to kill more bacteria. And the principle that we have is that when you have a chicken that's infected with Salmonella, there's a colonization. So our bacteriophages attach, kill off the first bacteria, and then keep on spreading, getting rid of that infection within the chicken. The other part of that, though, is our bacteriophage are also prophylactic. So if we give chickens our bacteriophage, if they do peck and grab an E. coli or a Salmonella or a Clostridium from the ground, that bacteria, when it's coming into the body, will be killed off by the bacteriophages. So it's sort of a double, we can get it in the gut if it's still there or we get it when it's coming in through the beak through prophylactic use.
Interesting. So there's no systemic absorption of your phages. They go into the gastrointestinal tract, they act on the bacteria, and then they eliminate in the feces?
You got it.
Right. So that I think inherently speaks to the safety of your product. If it's not being absorbed by the chicken, number one, there's no human food safety concerns. It can't possibly be found in the meat. And I think it also talks to the target animal safety as well. If it's not being absorbed into the body, it's just kind of clearing out the pathogens. That's really interesting too. And I think the other thing that phages have that's an advantage over antibiotics is, my child had strep throat last week and I gave her antibiotics knowing it's killing the pathogens, but it's also killing all of those beneficial bacteria, which is not good. So phages don't do that, just to be clear.
No, they do not. In fact, we target them to pathogenic organisms only. And the normal flora are all present. It's funny, just to give you an example of that, we did a really good comprehensive study of reduction of Salmonella and E. coli. And when we looked at enteric organisms just generally, we saw that it was really high. And I was like, well, geez, that's supposed to be high. And people were like, well, why? And I said, well, it's supposed to be high because those are the good E. coli and the good Salmonella that don't cause pathogenic results. But we want to keep those in the gut because they make your gut good, or the chicken's gut. And that was, again, a point where a farmer was surprised because they thought we should kill all of the bacteria. But that's not the goal here.
Right.
The goal, of course, is to kill the pathogenic ones.
Yeah. No, so interesting. So you talked about some trials that you guys have done. So I believe you've done a number of trials with chickens. Can you talk to me at a high level about the results you've seen? Were there any safety concerns at all? And what about the efficacy of your product in terms of actually preventing or treating disease?
Sure. No. So I laughed when you said safety because I'm going to tell you two anecdotal stories. So one, first off, when we first started with bacteriophages, I sat down with investors and I said, I'm going to use viruses to cure, people. And people thought I was nuts because they're thinking a virus, like, what are you actually doing? So what I ended up doing was actually putting together 100 years of safety data for phages. A lot of that data comes from Europe, and a lot of that data comes from, decades ago, because, that's when we were actually looking at phages. And I have not found anything yet that was a credible result showing any type of immunological response to phages. Now, sometimes if you inject, you'll have injection site wounds, but there has been hundreds of injections done with phages, and not one thing has been seen to be adverse. So in talking about safety, I don't think you see that in any other drug. You'll see, some type of reaction that occurs. So for the safety of that, not only my talking about safety, but the 100 years of data, phages are fully safe. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, let me tell you the other anecdotal funny story is, yes, we are currently doing many trials. And when we do trials, we have the farmers, again, put in the phages into the water. The way that we do that in some countries is we add the phage to a bottle of water, and then that bottle of water is added to the liquid water inside the canister for the chickens. Well, we had one of our farmers actually accidentally drink the water that had the phage in it. And we got a phone call, of course, right away saying, oh my God, is something going to happen to me? All of this stuff. And we were like, no, everything will be fine. The only thing that you might find different is your poop is going to be a little bit more solid because you're going to kill off the E. coli and the bacteria in your gut. And ironically enough, I met the gentleman just when I was in Bangladesh recently, and he said he never felt better after he drank that phage, and he said his guts were really good. So just an anecdotal story about the safety behind our phages in humans. Now, when we talk about chickens, listen, if you use something that's not safe on an animal, you're going to see that in the death of the animal or in the decrease of the health of the animal. When we do all of our studies, like we've done now numerous studies in Bangladesh, which is, again, I'm not going to say it's the most clean environment for barns. Western standards and Bangladeshi standards are much different. However, when we're using our product is creating a health for the bird. So you see that there's no deleterious effect. And now, what do I mean by health? Well, after a 32-day cycle, we've increased the protein production using our bacteriophages by 22%. So each bird is gaining 22% more protein than birds not treated or birds treated with an acidifier. Because again, acidifiers don't work as well. When we're looking at feed conversion rates went from 1.7 down to 1.5. Now, what is a feed conversion rate? Well, a feed conversion rate is I have to feed a chicken 1.5 kilograms of food for it to grow 1 kilogram. So if I'm decreasing the amount of food that chicken is eating and increasing the weight, that's a win-win for the farmer. He's using less food, he's getting more protein, and he's having no diseased chicken. So those are the benefits of using our bacteriophages, and we see it. It's the farmer is seeing it. So there's no, I always love these experiments that they try to make us do to show that there's no toxicity. Doing toxicity studies in rats with 10 to the 14 phages have shown no toxic effect. You can't actually kill a rat by giving it that much phage. The only way you're going to kill it is if you drown it in the liquid that actually has the phage. So again, the safety behind phages, in my opinion, shouldn't even be a question. Mm-hmm. That's why, again, I look at governments, and I'm sure I'm jumping some of your questions, but if we look at governments in other areas, they've looked at this data and they've said, okay, bacteriophages are a probiotic. There you go, move forward, because we know they're safe. They're not going to harm anybody because we already know that. Just move forward with treating. And, that to me is forward thinking, especially with a government with a new product.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So, just one more question about the efficacy. So, you talked about how your products help to prevent the disease, how you've seen significant effects on growth and performance, which is huge, and that sounds very similar to what antibiotics do. And that's why farmers are using antibiotics subtherapeutically to keep animals healthy and also to optimize the growth and performance. How do your products, and you might not know this, but I'm just curious how your products compare to antibiotics, and based on the data you've seen, could they potentially replace antibiotics subtherapeutically?
Yeah. So to answer your question, 100% we can replace antibiotics. I'm not sure if all phage companies would be able to do that because of price points. Again, I was telling you how we pride ourselves about how we can grow our phages to very high concentrations. That allows us to be price competitive with antibiotics. So, one thing I will say is if you go to a farmer and you say, hey, I have a product for you, but it's going to cost you 2 cents more a chicken, the farmer is going to tell you to go at the door because they don't have that capacity to do that. But if I come in and say, hey, I have a product that is the same price as the antibiotic that you're currently using, but it works better and it's antibiotic free because, again, governments are moving away from antibiotics, the farmer is very excited about using it because it's the same price. So to talk about the efficacy behind our product with antibiotics, I love the anecdotal stories because that's the stories where you really see things happening. So in one of our first trials, we were doing layers. So again, chickens, broilers are the ones we eat on our tables. Layers are the ones that give us the eggs that we eat at our tables. Different chicken. Again, they are processed differently, and they live and have different life cycles. So when we were treating a layer barn, we had antibiotics in one of the barns. It wasn't our study, but they just were using antibiotics. So we got some really good collective data. A barn that had nothing in it, and then the barn that was using our bacteriophage. And all of that experiments were going forward, they had, while those experiments were going forward, they had an avian flu outbreak. Okay, so now avian flu, our phages don't do stuff against flu. Antibiotics don't do anything against flu. So all I'm talking about here is the general health of the chickens from the 3 treatment courses. Our chickens, we had over 28% higher survival rates from that avian influenza outbreak as the other 2 barns. So the antibiotics and the non-treatment were actually the same. Our barn was different. Now, I can't answer that scientifically because I didn't study and look at all of the cells and see what's actually going on. But all I'm telling you there is the efficacy of our product works really well, keeping the birds healthy, increasing protein, and decreasing, again, the susceptibility that they have to other diseases. Now, again, I'm shooting some things out there that I wouldn't be able to prove scientifically, but I'm showing you sort of the results that we got from the farmer saying, hey, I had a flu outbreak that came through here. Your product works against flu. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. But what it is the chickens are healthier, and this is why they could stop the infection.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that really speaks to the way a lot of, more natural products work is you've got your product, which I think is optimizing, the gut makeup. So we're reducing the pathogens, we're allowing the beneficial bacteria to really thrive and grow. And when faced with that disease challenge, the animal is better able to resist and fight it off. So Stephen, the other thing I just wanted to quickly, and you kind of touched on this, but I wanted to go into it a bit further. So you talked about how your products are targeting Salmonella, E. coli, and Clostridium. And 2 of those, Salmonella, E. coli, are obviously responsible for a lot of food poisoning cases around the world. So is there also a human food safety play with your product? Do you think you could help reduce foodborne infections?
100%. So, for me, I'm a small company. We have many initiatives that we want to move forward with. Food safety is one of those. Why? Because bacteriophage have been shown to really reduce spoilage. Now, when you're reducing spoilage, you're increasing, your product being on a shelf, which is for everybody. The other thing is, I'm sure you hear on the news, E. coli, Salmonella infections of strawberries and of spinach. Well, this all comes from fecal contamination from our industry of animal feed. Right. So when you have the mixing of the water, of course, it gets into our agriculture, our food agriculture, and we end up having these bacterial infections. Bacteriophage can be used to spray those strawberries removing the bacterial infection, and then increasing the product life of the actual strawberry. So I'm saying, yes, we as a company are trying to move forward in this avenue. The one issue that we currently have, again, in Canada is the regulatory regime and how we want to move forward. I'm going to say this and it's going to sound funny, but one of the only reasons that we haven't gotten into food safety is because we would have to go to the United States to start it. And that just is an extra, that's an extra added problem that I have to sort of now jump the border. And then we're a Canadian company going to the US. We have US companies that are competing with us. So who's going to get, promoted or advanced faster? Mm-hmm. So for me, I put it on the back burner, because as we're moving forward as a company, we're fully in South Asia for our poultry products. But for food safety, that's not going to be a SKU in Bangladesh. That will be something here in Canada that, again, increases our food longevity. I don't want to say anything weird about the government, but I think if they had a clearer path for people or for me to move this type of a product forward, we would already see this in Canada, because people call me all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. No, that's good. And that's a good segue into what I want to get into next. So you've given us a really good kind of overview about your product efficacy, safety. I don't think there's a doubt in your mind that this product works, that it's completely safe. You guys are a Canadian company. I know for a fact that there is a big need for products like this. And it was always your intention to pursue the Canadian market. So what happened? Why do farmers in Canada not have this product?
Well, it's not because they don't want it. I'll be straight up with you there. Okay, so our path in Canada, let me start with this first. I am a super proud Canadian, and I've worked in the government for many years. So at least 15 years of my career have been in the federal government, working for the Public Health Agency of Canada. And when I started this company, I never in a million years would have said regulatory would have been my hurdle. When I came out of the government, again, I saw a clear path. I did a lot of testing in the government for compounds, again, using, antimicrobial compounds. So I understood how the process worked. And what ended up happening was we ended up having a phage product. I called to have an initial meeting with the Veterinary Drug Directorate, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, as well as the Public Health Agency of Canada. The reason I needed all three there is because they didn't quite know where I fit. So I just said, well, bring everybody. We'll have a good chat and we'll discuss what's going on. So I sat down and we started talking about bacteriophages. Now, the first meeting was kind of funny. And again, I'm going to speak openly here. And I'm certainly not criticizing anybody, but not one person in the government knew what a bacteriophage was. So then I had to spend the next hour explaining that, yes, it is a virus. And yes, I want to use it to spray on things, or I wanted to use it to treat things, but no, it's not going to kill you. And that process really pulled the air out of my balloons, because I realized very quickly that the government wasn't ready for a new product. So then what did we do? We moved forward and we started to reach out and really try to educate the government. And I ran into a deputy minister that worked in phages. She had a lot of experience in phages, and she was in a position where she could really help us move phages forward within the Veterinary Drug Directorate. So we started communicating about how we could move forward. And again, the path was kind of clearing. It was a bit foggy, but we were getting a clearer understanding of how we could move forward together. Bacteriophages not being a drug, the regulatory folks wanting to categorize me as a drug. And I'll explain why that's not good in just a little bit. I just sort of want to give you the lay of the land first. Then, unfortunately, COVID hit. She ended up getting a new job in the government somewhere else. The new person that came in had no interest in what we were doing or phages, and no interest in, kind of moving forward. So now what did that mean? So let me explain what this all means. When I applied to use bacteriophages in the government, they said, okay, we don't know where you're going to fit yet. And I know you know a lot of this. We don't know where you're going to fit yet. And they put us in as a drug because of our claims, right? If you have a claim that you're treating, or if you have a claim that you're doing something that's medicinal, I don't know, that's probably not the best word, but if you're doing something like that, then They want you to be a drug. Now, why is that? Well, the government has a lot of check boxes if you're a drug that they can just follow. So GMP, all of the stuff that they want you to do. So all of that stuff is needed, and that's why they sort of put you in those check boxes. So I am not a drug, I'm a biologic. And what does that mean? Well, when I do the drug application, and I might be short on the numbers, but I believe there's 350 odd questions that you have to answer from, from kinetics to, toxicity to all kinds of things, which again, we have a lot of information for, but there are things that we can't actually do because we're not a drug. So of those things that we can't do, there was 144 questions. So when I was working with the first ADM, we had all of these questions and I was going through them one by one with her and her team over email. And it was happening rapidly. Like 1 week, we would have a question, we would get an answer right away. And then we keep building on that and putting together a really robust application. When she left and I continued to try to do this, I was basically told to put in my application. They will review it. Once they review it, if they hit something that is questionable, they'll then send it back to me with their questions, get me to answer it, and then I can send it back to them. And I asked her, what would the turnaround time to be? She said, about 3 months per question. And I said, well, there's 144 of them. If we get started now, we'll be done in 15 years. So that's why for me, it didn't seem valuable anymore. As a company, is it my job to educate the government on how to process and how to regulate new products? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I feel like we're doing it though. Why are we doing it? Well, because we don't have any other choices. There's no, bacteriophages are being used all around the world right now. Governments are modifying and changing their regulatory structures because of the use of bacteriophages. Australia is a very good example of a progressive country that is using phages and actually, I'm going to say regulating them properly because they don't fall into any other regulatory regime. For me, it's sad because I worked in the government for many years. I saw the capabilities there. And when I look at how I have a brand new product that farmers I have farmers in Canada that are calling me saying, what's up? Are you regulated yet? And I'm like, no, the government still isn't giving me a clear path forward. And then, they say, well, what can I do to help? I say, call your MP, do the things that you can actually do to get the government to change. But, I'm going to say this and then I'll stop. But I gave a presentation about our product at the Chicken Association about 8 months ago or a year ago, somewhere within that realm. After I was done that call, I had both companies that actually cover the majority of farms in Canada asking for my product because the Canadian government no longer allows them to use antibiotics prophylactically. And they see that using my product would increase the amount of protein that they could produce for their feed chain or for our food chain. Again, to me, that's puzzling that we can't move forward with a product that's been shown safe, that works, farmers want, meaning there's an economy for it. And we are only being held up because the government hasn't come up with a good plan yet to how to regulate something that, honestly, I would drink it every day if it made regulations come faster. It's just there's no toxic effect.
Something that you said previously about your product not really fitting anywhere. And I think that's a really big issue right now. So in Canada, animal health products typically fall into one of 4 categories. You're a drug, you're a biologic, and that's where your vaccines and your diagnostics go. You're a feed, or you're a veterinary health product. And VHPs are sort of your natural health products. And each one of these classifications is governed by specific regulations. And if you don't fall into one of these categories, it's very difficult, I know, for the regulators to kind of go, okay, what do we do with this? And so the default is always to push it into the drug category because it's sort of safest from a regulatory perspective. If it's a drug, we're covering all of our bases in terms of making sure it's safe and efficacious and all of that. And we in our business are seeing time and time again that I would say the animal health industry, the innovation is very much outpacing the regulations. So you've got these new, really exciting, really different products that I think have the potential to make some significant impacts in the way we raise food and the way we feed the world. And we can't get through the regulations because they're so dated. And, there was one situation, I won't go into a lot of detail, but it was a probiotic product. And it's been on the market in Europe and the US for over 20 years. The safety and the efficacy is well proven. There's no issue there. But our regulations couldn't quite get it to fit into a feed or a VHP. And so the regulator said, well, it's a drug. And the problem with doing that, not only does it significantly increase, costs and time to market, but a lot of times these natural products, and I know yours, the efficacy is very good, but a lot of times these natural products, they cannot meet that minimum threshold for efficacy. So they actually cannot get into the market in Canada. There's no way. And it's really frustrating because, like you said, like these products are safe. The farmers want them. And when the regulators are saying to the farmers, we don't want you using antibiotics subtherapeutically, well, you have to give them something else. There is no way, with our population, we cannot feed the world without these products that are going to make the animals grow better, keep them healthy. It's a really, really tough situation. So for you to go kind of back to your product, the reason that they made you guys a drug, you talked about the claims. So anytime you have a product that has a disease prevention or treatment claim, that immediately pushes you into the drug category. The other thing that does is even if you're not claiming that, if you have an antimicrobial mode of action, which phages clearly do, they are directly targeting pathogens, they're killing them, that automatically makes you a drug as well. So I would say for your product, you have a drug classification. It does still provide you a path to market, but can you talk to me specifically about why that is so problematic for you and why that has made you, at least for now, put the Canadian pursuit on hold?
So for us, it's about timing and it's about cost. When we looked at the drug experiments that they wanted, we had 95% of them complete. There were a few experiments that I disagreed with. And let me explain what I mean by disagree. I'm okay with doing experiments that show something, and that is a requirement. When I met with the government and we were talking about experiments that they thought we should do with bacteriophages, one of the experiments that they wanted us to do was to evaluate how the bacteriophage was given to all of the chickens in a 30,000 or a 15,000 barn, like a 15,000 chicken barn. So for me, it's not the government's job to regulate how I use my product. It's them to test the safety and the efficacy to make sure that I'm not selling a product that doesn't work and one that's totally safe. To do the experiment, I had no problem doing it. The only issue I had was they would not allow us to sell the chickens after we did the experiment. So for me, I'm killing 15,000 chickens for no reason. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we already show that the bacteriophages go throughout the water system by actually going there and pulling it out and looking at it on a plate. We don't need the chickens to drink it. And this is the whole argument that I've sort of had with them about, why are we doing this experiment? And this is where we got into the biggest discussion about, well, now you're a drug and, you have to follow these drug experiments. Mm-hmm. And one of these experiments, again, just to add to this, we went ahead and we found a farm that was doing work with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And he came forward and he said, listen, I do this all the time. We test non-toxic drugs. We test non-toxic products, health products in animals. And I have this kind of running agreement with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So I was like, well, listen, I have phages. Here's all of the toxicity data that we have. So he took that toxicity data and he gave it to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They came back and said, yeah, go ahead. But about 12 hours before the experiment was supposed to start, he got a phone call from the VDD and CIFA saying, you have to stop this experiment because if you do it, you cannot sell your chickens. And now I got confused because I was never told why. He was never told why. He was just told that he can't do this or can't move forward. So for me, again, there's a disconnect in the government as well that they really need to start figuring out what they're going to do for new products and move forward clearly. Mm-hmm. Like I'm a company. Every time you tell me to do an experiment, it costs me $300,000. So if you say, Stephen, I need you to do this experiment because it's so important that we know this, then 100% I'll do it. But if you're like, Stephen, I'm curious as a person whether or not this works, that's not a question that you ask a company, because what you're doing is you're taking away my financing for doing these experiments for non-needed experimentation. Mm-hmm. And that's why I stepped back from Canada, because I was wasting my time.
Yeah.
I was wasting my money, my investors' money, and I saw no clear path. I to this day, I will not walk back to Canada until they have their, here I was going to swear, have their stuff together, because it's very important. Like this is the other thing that I want to point out is if you're a company, you have money, a certain amount of money that you can use to move forward with. If you're not a company and you're actually an academic or a government facility, you're using taxpayers' money. So time and money means nothing to you, but it means a lot to real companies that are actually trying to make something move forward. So for me, we're a company that's currently going public. We've put out our public offering, and I think it was March 31st. We plan on going public by the end of the year. We're doing that specifically so we can garner more funding to do these experimentations that, again, I'm not going to say all countries, but I'm going to say specifically Canada is putting forward that are very costly, don't tell you much, and will allow them to check their checkbox, which, for me, I have to look at what the market is in Canada. If the market is high enough for us to penetrate, then I'll do that. If it's not high enough, then, I'll leave Canada to deal with the acidifiers that they've approved. Yeah. I can't do much more.
Yeah. And just for our listeners, so the trial, I think, Stephen, that you were talking about is a field trial, which is a required component of a drug submission. And generally, the regulators will not allow those animals to go into the food chain for unapproved drugs if there's any concern with safety or drug residues in the meat or things like that. And I think from your perspective, that's a bit frustrating because they're not looking at your specific product where for a fact there is no human food safety concerns at all because the chickens are not absorbing it. So I totally hear what you're saying. And I think it goes back to these boxes that, the regulations say, well, we have to have this, and we're not going to kind of use logic or common sense to look at your product. We're just going to put you into the same box that every other drug goes into, and it doesn't work for your product. So I think I feel that frustration for sure. So Stephen, the other question I had, so you mentioned that you are pursuing markets in Southeast Asia. And I'm just wondering if you have received a classification decision from there. So if you're not going to be a drug, what are you going to be regulated as in those markets?
We are a probiotic or a food additive.
Okay.
And that's registration took. So let me be clear here. All the safety data wasn't required, which we all had. We put that forward. Registration took less than 2 months.
Wow. Yeah. So just by comparison for our listeners, a drug registration in Canada, once you file that, you're looking at a minimum of 300 calendar days. Then there's usually some back and forth with questions. So that's a much longer time period. And also for our listeners, if you were to go the feed route in Canada, so that's the route that you went, Stephen, in Southeast Asia. If you're a Category 3 feed, which basically means you're a new feed, which these phages would be, you're looking at 2 to 3 years for that review. So I wanted to put that into perspective, how fast 2 months is.
Yeah, no, it's again, for us, we were surprised, but we were also very happy. And the reason they did this is because their government did an evaluation of phages. They found out where they are going to be best categorized. And as long as they're safe and non-toxic, they moved forward. And that was, it's funny because I've met with the government officials for regulatory in South Asia and Bangladesh for the country that we're starting in. And they were they knew what phages were. Mm-hmm. They understood how they worked. They understood, the ramifications. Like, listen to this. If we could increase protein production by 22%, in a country that has the largest population in the world, we're changing things there. Mm-hmm. We can do this in Canada. Like, when you go and you buy a chicken at the grocery store, some of that's inflation, but it's also that the farmers have really no avenue now to treat their chickens to ensure that they're, growing to the 2 kilograms that they need. They're losing a little bit more every day because of disease. They don't have options, and they're trying, different things that, I'm a bit of a naturalist. I'll be honest with me. I'm honest with you. I'm like, I hate using chemicals for things when we don't have to, because chemicals they have a breakdown period. They have a retention period. So if we're using natural products that we know are specifically made for killing bacteria, and we're not even looking at it, but they're okay with us using chemicals, I'm still, I'm at odds a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
Yeah. And I mean, I've yet in my career to come across a drug that doesn't have adverse effects of some kind. The fact that you have this product that is so completely safe that you've never seen any adverse effects, and it works. Like, it works just as well as antibiotics. As a Canadian, I'm sad that we don't have this here. But I totally understand, why you've had to make the decision that you've made. The other thing I wanted to kind of throw out there as an important consideration. So Canada does a really good job of producing meat. We have a vibrant, dairy sector, poultry, swine, aquaculture, beef. But we do import meat as well to be able to meet the demand that we have in this country. And the majority of imports do come from the US and the European Union, where the regulatory is very similar. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's totally harmonized, but the requirements are quite similar in terms of safety and efficacy. But we do also import meat from Asia Pacific, as well as Latin America. And I can tell you for sure, regulatory burden is significantly lower in those areas. And the reason I say that is it's entirely possible that, meat animal products that are being imported there, those animals have been fed products that are unapproved in Canada. And I don't want to instill fear. There is no risk from a human food safety perspective, because regardless of the country of origin, meat cannot have drug residue. So we don't have to worry about that. But I think it does highlight the fact that Canadian farmers, it puts them at a disadvantage when farmers in these other countries can use these products and are seeing these huge benefits in terms of the growth and the feed efficiency, and are able to really reduce costs because they can get their animals to, the slaughter weight faster than our farmers can. And looking at an animal welfare and disease state as well, like, again, if these farmers are being told, reduce your subtherapeutic antibiotic use, but we're not going to approve any other products, how do you accomplish that? So I don't know, Steve, if you have any thoughts on that, but I do really feel for Canadian producers that can't get products like yours.
No, I 100% agree with you. I get phone calls from the chicken producers here already saying, listen, if I could use your product, I see increases in my business. The other thing I'll add, though, is chicken eggs. I'm going to use this as an example. So in Canada, we currently have a hatch rate of about 85%. And again, it's a very high hatch rate. What that means is all of the chickens that we grow, that we eat on the table, and all of the chickens that we grow to give us chicken eggs, we have to hatch those from somewhere. And hatching eggs in Canada, we did 1.7 trillion a couple of years ago. So that's a huge, huge market. Now, for us, they're currently using a disinfectant that is, doesn't have a DIN number. It actually says on the bottle, cannot be used for human consumption. And I'm trying to get phages to replace that. Now, we've done the science. The phages work wonderfully to do the exact same job as the disinfectants. Now, moving forward with that, I had to apply for what's called a letter of no objection, or a LONO. Now, getting a letter of no objection allows me to use a product, for non-consumption is kind of what I'll sort of put out there. When I applied, they said they had a 2-month turnaround time. We're now on month 6. I sent a letter just saying, hey, where's the application? And I got a response back saying, this is a food cleaner that is not essential. Basically, we'll get to it when we can. And I thought, non-essential. And I'm thinking, okay, well, to me, it's essential because now we're removing something from farmers that they shouldn't be using. In fact, if you read the label, it's like, whoa, did that get approved? And now they're saying it's not essential and we're just going to take as much time. So that's another one of the things that I Canada just makes me kind of cringe a little bit is when you ask a question, it's very easy to have a response that's a little bit more, understanding. What I mean by that is, hey, yes, we're looking at this now. We've sent it to our toxicity tests or whatever, rather than just saying, hey, we'll get to it when we get to it, because it's not an essential thing in our calendar. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a shot in the stomach. So for me, again, when we talk about Canada, I'm kind of done. I'm kind of done. Like we're going to be treating in a very short time 25 million chickens a month in South Asia. That number is going to go up to 60 million. Our mastitis products are coming online. We have many products that are, again, going to be popping up. We're still doing human cases within the United States, again, because Canada is not very receptive to these types of treatments. But we're going to move forward as a company. And I think Canada is going to have to catch up to us, actually. And one of the things that I'm hoping that this does, as well as all of the work that you guys are doing, is that they actually shake their head and say, "Oh, geez, we've missed something here. Let's get back to the table and let's figure out really how to help these companies in Canada." Yeah. Because as a small business, I'm like, this is ridiculous living in Canada as a business, especially for biotech.
Yeah. So, Stephen, I guess with that, I wonder if you could talk specifically about what you want to see on the regulatory side that would make you sort of reignite your pursuit of the Canadian market. I mean, we've talked about the problematic drug classification, but yeah, can you kind of get into specifics there? What needs to happen?
Guidance document. To me, that's just the simplest thing. What is a guidance document? Well, the government develops a document that looks at all of the key features that they need to look at bacteriophage. Now, not a cut and paste from a drug, but an actual review of what phages are and what needs to be looked at them as per their regulatory requirements, right? Because right now they're not doing that. So a guidance document would be very beneficial. Why? Because now me as a company, I see exactly what I need to do. Mm-hmm. Now, when they say the drug, again, they asked me to do an LD50. So if I'm a drug, I have to do a lethal dose 50. As I told you, cannot do a lethal dose 50 because they're non-toxic. Right. So that, again, those types of questions can be removed from that guidance document because they're not needed. Mm-hmm. And it makes a clear path forward. Okay. The other thing it does is it allows governments to understand, where maybe they missed something. When I was told to do this study for 15,000 chickens, maybe they would understand that, hey, if you show that you're non-toxic in any capacity and you're not in the food, then no, we can sell the chickens. Like be open to shifting a bit.
Right.
When I worked in the government, we were in outbreaks all the time. If we didn't shift, oh boy, nothing would work. And that's something that I think is very rigid in the regulatory regime in Canada, is they don't even want to even discuss it. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the point that is, as a company, just not worth it.
Yeah. And I think the word rigid is a really good one, Stephen. And I do think that our regulatory needs to change in the fact that it needs to be agile, it needs to be flexible, and it needs to keep up with the pace of innovation. So it's, yeah, I totally hear you. And I think it's also really interesting because I expected your answer to be that you would re-pursue the Canadian market if we could go as a feed or a vet health product, but you're not actually saying that. So what I'm hearing is you would be okay with the drug classification, provided there could be flexibility and the creation of a guidance document that's specific to phages. So that's really interesting to hear.
The reason I'm putting that framework on it is because phages are not just here for animals. They're going to be here for humans. Mm-hmm. And when we move to human treatments, we're going to have a classifications that's similar to drug due to GMP manufacturing, all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But if we start with a guidance document that is related, again, from a perspective that we're going to be using this in many facets, then we have the clear path forward. Mm-hmm. Because what will end up happening is, say, oh, food additive. Okay, now you're a food additive. But then when you try to go into humans, we're gonna have the same problem.
Right. Yeah. So
do it for phages, because phages are, I'm going to say this and people might disagree with me. They are the next science.
Yeah.
They are the next path forward for us with dealing with bacterial infections. You might have heard me say this before, but as humans, we really honed chemicals. We know how to use chemicals. We've been doing it for the past 100 years. Yeah. Now it's biologics time. And that's where we're going to figure out how to use these to contend with these bacterial infections.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So my last question, and I hate to end on a sour note, but I'm just wondering about the future of Cytophage as a Canadian company. If you can't access the Canadian market, are you going to stay? Are you going to go?
So, for me, I'm a very proud Canadian. It kills me every time I have to think about this. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to keep my R&D in Canada right now because I have such a great science team that I've been building. My lab team has been with me for, between 15 and 20 years. When they come and join our group, they never leave. So we have a very, very good science team, and I don't want to disrupt that. So for me, R&D is going to stay here, but I am going to say that we're already a sub in Delaware. So we're slowly becoming a U.S. company. I'm also doing sub companies in Europe, as well as South Asia. And for me, I'm going to have to follow the bouncing ball where regulatory allows us to move forward. One of the other issues that I'm having in Canada, which is it's a bizarre one. If I create a product here, I need to ship it out of Canada. In order to ship it out of Canada, I need a letter, and that letter is a letter of no objection or a letter of free sale. To get that letter, I have to be registered.
Yes. Yeah.
So for me, I'm now doing manufacturing out of country because of a silly little thing that, again, if you looked at it and you were somebody that actually had the ability to change it, you would be like, oh boy, this is easy. This is an easy fit. But that's where I'm stuck. So a Canadian company, maybe if the government changes and allows me to be a Canadian company, then I'd be happy to stay here. Yeah. But until they do that, no, I'm unfortunately have to start moving on.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for discussing this with me, and I sincerely hope that we do see your products in the Canadian market in the near future. As I said, there is a huge need, and I know they would be well received by producers, and I think Canadian consumers as well. Or, you see in the grocery stores, there's all these meat products raised without antibiotics, but are people thinking about the animal welfare there? Like, if they were raised without antibiotics, did you have a lot of sick birds that died that could have been prevented if you'd used antibiotics? So I think it's a good trend, but we need to provide those tools to our farmers. And I think phages absolutely have the potential to do that. So to our listeners, if you want to learn more about Cytophage and the amazing work that this company is doing, please visit their website at www.cytophage.com. I also want to emphasize that Cytophage is not alone in their challenges with regulatory burden in Canada. We are hoping that this is going to be a series where we're going to speak with a number of companies that have faced significant regulatory hurdles that have ultimately resulted in their decision to abandon the Canadian market entirely at the ultimate detriment to Canadian farmers and consumers. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. All of our podcasts will be posted on our website at www.pauldickassociates.com, as well as our PDA YouTube channel. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for important updates pertaining to the animal health industry. I also want to put it out there that if you have experienced regulatory challenges in Canada or any other jurisdictions, we'd love to hear from you and we'd love to help. You can find our contact info on our website. Thank you.